I hired a private investigator to follow my husband. Turns out, he was following me. I hired a private investigator to follow my husband because I was convinced he was cheating on me. 2 weeks later, the investigator told me something I never expected. My husband had hired a different private investigator to follow me, and the two PIs had been inadvertently tailing each other for days. Neither of us was having an affair. We were both planning surprise romantic gestures for our 10th anniversary. We'd each spent $5,000 spying on each other instead of just talking. And when we finally sat down and laughed about the absurdity of it all, we realized something much worse. Our marriage was completely broken and had been for years. I'm 36 years old, and I've been married to my husband Derek for almost 10 years. We met in our mid-20s, fell in love fast, and got married within 18 months. The early years were good. We were happy, or at least I thought we were. We had careers we cared about, a nice apartment that eventually became a nice house, friends and hobbies and plans for the future. We talked about having kids someday, but never quite pulled the trigger on it. There was always something else that needed to happen first. Looking back now, I can see that we'd been drifting apart for the past 3 or 4 years. Nothing dramatic, no big fights or obvious problems, just a slow, gradual disconnect that neither of us acknowledged or addressed. We stopped having those long conversations we used to have, stopped really listening to each other, started spending more time on our phones than talking at dinner, started going to bed at different times, started living parallel lives in the same house. But I didn't see it that way at the time. I thought we were just busy. I thought we were just in a comfortable phase of marriage where you didn't need constant attention and validation. I thought we were fine. Then, about 3 months ago, Derek started acting differently. He was coming home late from work 2 or 3 nights a week. He was on his phone constantly, smiling at texts and then quickly putting the phone face down when I came near. He started going to the gym more often, paying more attention to his appearance, buying new clothes. He was distracted during conversations, like his mind was somewhere else, and he was being vague about his schedule, giving me general answers when I asked about his day. All the classic signs. At least that's what I thought. Every article I'd ever read about infidelity, every story I'd heard from friends whose partners had cheated, they all described exactly what Derek was doing. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself to trust him. I told myself there had to be innocent explanations. But the doubt grew. It infected everything. I started noticing more things. He'd changed his phone password and didn't tell me the new one. He'd started closing the laptop when I walked into the room. He'd take phone calls in the garage or the backyard, speaking in low tones I couldn't hear. Twice, I'd called his office when he said he was working late and he hadn't answered his desk phone. I became someone I didn't recognize. I started checking his pockets, looking through his wallet, searching for receipts or evidence. I found nothing concrete, but that almost made it worse. The absence of evidence felt like proof he was being careful, covering his tracks. A careless cheater leaves clues. A smart cheater leaves nothing. I couldn't eat properly, couldn't sleep through the night. I'd lie awake next to Derek, watching him sleep peacefully while my mind spun through scenarios. Who was she? Someone from his office? A woman he'd met at the gym? How long had it been going on? Did he love her? Was he planning to leave me? I tried dropping hints that I was feeling disconnected, that I wished we spent more quality time together. Derek would agree and promise we'd do better, then continue with the same pattern. Late nights, secretive phone use, vague explanations. My anxiety spiraled. 2 months ago, I decided I needed proof one way or another. I couldn't keep living in this state of suspicion and uncertainty. So I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private investigator. I found him through an online search, a man named Marcus Walsh, who ran a small investigation firm specializing in infidelity cases. His website was professional and discreet. His prices were steep, but I didn't care. I needed to know the truth. I met Marcus at his office, a small suite in a generic office building.
He was in his 50s, balding, with kind eyes that had probably seen every variation of marital breakdown. I told him about Derek's behavior, about my suspicions, about needing definitive answers. Marcus listened without judgment and explained how it would work. He'd assigned someone to follow Derek for 2 weeks, documenting his movements, taking photos and video, noting any suspicious behavior or meetings. The retainer was $5,000. I wrote the check with shaking hands, feeling equal parts relief at taking action and shame at spying on my own husband. Most of the time, Marcus told me gently, we don't find what the client fears. Most of the time, there's an innocent explanation. I wanted to believe him, but I'd convinced myself over the past months that Derek was absolutely having an affair. I was just gathering evidence before confronting him. The investigator started surveillance the following Monday. I went about my life trying to act normal, which was harder than I'd expected. Every time Derek came home late or checked his phone, I had to resist the urge to tell him I knew someone was watching him. Every time he gave me a vague answer about his evening, I wanted to scream that soon I'd have proof of whatever he was hiding. Meanwhile, I had my own secret I was keeping from Derek. Our 10th anniversary was coming up in 6 weeks. I'd been planning a surprise party for him, reaching out to his friends and family, booking a venue, coordinating with caterers. It was going to be a big celebration, a renewal of our commitment to each other, proof that our marriage was strong despite my fears. The irony of planning an anniversary party while simultaneously having my husband followed by a private investigator wasn't lost on me, but I rationalized it. If the investigator found nothing, the party would be a beautiful celebration. If he found proof of an affair, well, at least I'd know before making a fool of myself with a big romantic gesture. I'd been secretive about the party planning out of necessity, taking phone calls from the venue coordinator in my car, texting with Derek's best friend about the guest list while Derek was in the shower, meeting with the caterer during my lunch break, staying up late after Derek went to bed to work on the photo slideshow I was putting together. All of it done in secret to preserve the surprise. It never occurred to me that my secretive behavior might look suspicious to Derek, that my whispered phone calls and hidden texts and vague explanations about where I'd been might make him wonder what I was hiding. 2 weeks after hiring Marcus, he called and asked me to come to his office. His tone was strange, not sad exactly, but odd. I drove there with my heart pounding, convinced he was about to show me photos of Derek with another woman. I was already mentally preparing for divorce, for how I'd confront him, for what came next. Marcus greeted me in his office with an expression I couldn't quite read. Confusion? Amusement? He gestured for me to sit down and pulled up something on his computer. "This is unusual," he began. "In 20 years of doing this work, I've never encountered this particular situation." My stomach dropped. What had Derek done that was unusual even for a private investigator? He turned his screen toward me. It showed surveillance photos of Derek, getting into his car, walking into his office building. Nothing scandalous, just normal daily activities. Then Marcus pulled up another set of photos, and my confusion grew. These photos showed me getting into my car, walking into a coffee shop, normal daily activities. Why was Marcus showing me photos of myself? "Here's the situation," Marcus said slowly. "My operative was following your husband as requested. On day 4, he noticed something odd. Another person was also following your husband. Professional surveillance. My operative recognized the techniques, so he started documenting this other person. He clicked through more photos. A man in a dark sedan positioned to watch Derek's office. The same man at a restaurant where Derek had met a colleague for lunch. The man taking photos from his car. I had my operative approach this individual, professional courtesy, to find out who else was surveilling the same target. Turns out this man works for another investigation firm here in the city, and he'd been hired to follow your husband." I stared at the screen, not understanding. Someone else is investigating Derek? Who hired them? Marcus's expression was somewhere between sympathy and barely suppressed laughter. Your husband did. He hired them to follow you. The words didn't make sense at first. Derek hired an investigator to follow me? Why would he do that? Then it hit me like a physical blow. Derek thought I was cheating on him. That's why he hired an investigator. He'd been suspicious of me the same way I'd been suspicious of him. So both of you hired investigators, and both investigators had been surveilling each other's client, sometimes at the same time. It's been like a surveillance comedy. My operative would be following your husband, who was driving to some location where he'd meet with you, and the other investigator would be there following you to the same location. They've been inadvertently tailing each other for over a week. I felt dizzy. Did your operative find any evidence that Derek was cheating? No, nothing. Your husband goes to work, goes to the gym, meets with friends occasionally, and comes home. No suspicious meetings, no unexplained locations, no other women. He's clean. And the other investigator, did they find evidence that I was cheating? I spoke with my counterpart at the other firm. They found nothing on you either. You go to work, run errands, meet with friends, and come home. No affairs on either side. I should have felt relief. Instead, I felt a creeping sense of horror. We'd both been so convinced the other was cheating that we'd hired private investigators. We'd both spent thousands of dollars spying on each other for months, and we'd both been completely wrong. But why? I asked. Why was Derek suspicious of me? Marcus pulled up his notes. According to the other investigator, your husband came to them 2 months ago with concerns about your behavior. You'd been secretive, taking calls away from him, being vague about your schedule, staying up late on your laptop, acting distracted. All the behavior that made you suspicious of him. The party. Derek had been suspicious because I was planning his surprise party. And I'd been suspicious of Derek because... Why? What had he been doing that made me think he was cheating? Did the other investigator say what Derek was actually doing during all those late nights and secretive phone calls? Marcus nodded. Apparently, your husband was planning a surprise vow of renewal ceremony for your 10th anniversary. He'd been meeting with venues, coordinating with a wedding planner, arranging for a small intimate ceremony with close friends and family. All the secretive behavior that made you suspicious was him planning a surprise for you. I sat there in Marcus's office, my mind unable to process what I was hearing. Derek wasn't cheating. He'd been planning a vow renewal. I wasn't cheating. I'd been planning a party. We'd both become suspicious of each other because we were both trying to do something nice. And instead of talking to each other, instead of communicating, we'd both hired private investigators and spent $10,000 combined to spy on each other. It was absurd. It was ridiculous. It was the kind of sitcom mix-up that wouldn't happen in real life, except it had happened. It was happening. I started laughing. Not happy laughter. Hysterical, slightly unhinged laughter. Marcus watched me with concerned eyes, probably wondering if I was having a breakdown. Maybe I was. What do I do now? I asked when I could speak again. Do I tell Derek? Do I pretend this never happened? That's up to you, Marcus said. But in my professional opinion, you two need to talk to each other, really talk. Because the fact that you both immediately jumped to infidelity, that you both chose to hire investigators instead of having an honest conversation, that suggests some deeper issues in your marriage. He was right. I knew he was right, but I didn't want to hear it. I wanted this to be a funny story, a crazy misunderstanding that we'd laugh about someday. I didn't want to examine what it meant about us. I thanked Marcus and left, drove home in a daze. Derek was already there, in the kitchen making dinner. He looked up when I came in and smiled. The same smile I'd fallen in love with 10 years ago. Except now, I knew he hired someone to follow me. Now I knew he'd been suspicious of me for months. Now I knew neither of us trusted the other. "How was your day?" he asked, turning back to the stove. "Fine," I lied. Another lie in a marriage apparently built on lies. I couldn't bring myself to confront him right then. I needed time to think about how to handle this. So I made small talk, helped with dinner, sat across from him at the table, and pretended everything was normal. Just like we'd been doing for months, apparently. Pretending. That night, lying in bed next to Derek, I made a decision. I was going to tell him everything. About hiring the investigator, about what I'd discovered, about the mutual surveillance comedy we'd been starring in. And I was going to ask him to tell me the truth about why he'd been suspicious of me. We needed to have an honest conversation for once. We needed to talk about what had gone so wrong that we'd both assumed the worst of each other instead of just asking questions. The next morning, Saturday, I asked Derek if we could talk. Really talk. He looked nervous, which made sense if he'd been hiding his own investigation. We sat down in the living room with coffee, and I took a breath. "I have to tell you something, and I need you to just listen until I'm done, okay?" Derek nodded, looking increasingly worried. I told him everything. How I'd been suspicious of his behavior for months, how I'd convinced myself he was having an affair, how I'd hired a private investigator to follow him, how the investigator had discovered Derek had hired his own investigator to follow me, how neither of us was cheating, but we'd both been so sure the other one was. Derek's face went through several emotions as I talked. Shock, embarrassment, realization, and finally something that looked like devastation. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. "You thought I was cheating," he said. Not a question, a statement. "Yes, and you thought I was cheating." "I've been planning a vow renewal ceremony for our anniversary." That's what all the secretive behavior was. "I've been meeting with a wedding planner, booking a venue, coordinating with our families. I wanted to surprise you." "I've been planning a surprise party." Same reason. That's why I was being secretive. We sat there looking at each other. Two people who'd been married for 10 years and had simultaneously decided the other one was unfaithful. Two people who'd spent $10,000 on private investigations instead of having a single honest conversation. Derek started laughing, the same hysterical laughter I'd experienced in Marcus's office. I joined in, and for a moment it felt like we were sharing something. A crazy story, a ridiculous misunderstanding that we'd laugh about someday. I didn't want to examine what it meant about us. The laughter faded, and we were just sitting there in the heavy silence of everything that laughter couldn't fix. "This isn't funny," Derek said. "No, it's really not. We don't trust each other. At all. The moment either of us acted slightly different, we both immediately assumed cheating. We didn't talk to each other. We didn't ask questions. We just assumed the worst." "I know. That's not how a healthy marriage works." "I know." Another long silence. Then Derek said something that changed everything. "I don't think I've been happy for a while. I don't think either of us has." The words hung in the air. True words. Honest words. Words I'd been avoiding thinking for years. "No," I said slowly. "I don't think we have been."
That conversation didn't end with a resolution. We talked for hours, circling around the same painful truths without knowing what to do with them. Derek admitted he'd been feeling disconnected for years, but kept telling himself it was normal, that all long marriages went through phases. I admitted the same. We'd both been going through the motions, staying together out of habit and fear of change rather than because we genuinely wanted to be together. The surprise party and vow renewal ceremony we'd been planning separately felt hollow now. Romantic gestures couldn't fix what we'd just uncovered. You can't renewal vows you haven't been honoring. You can't celebrate a marriage that exists more on paper than in reality. We agreed to cancel both surprises. I had to call the venue coordinator and the caterer, explain that the party wasn't happening. Derek had to do the same with his wedding planner and venue. It was embarrassing telling people that now we weren't celebrating our anniversary after all, without explaining why. I told my contacts there had been a family emergency. Derek apparently did the same. The money we'd spent on investigators felt even more wasteful now. $10,000 total to confirm what we should have been able to establish through conversation. $10,000 to expose the rot at the foundation of our marriage. A few days after our initial conversation, Derek suggested marriage counseling. Not to save the marriage necessarily, but to understand what had happened to us, to figure out how we'd gotten here. I agreed. We found a therapist named Dr. Helen Reeves who had availability within the week. Her office was in a converted house in a quiet neighborhood, decorated to feel comfortable rather than clinical. We sat on opposite ends of her couch, a physical distance that mirrored our emotional one. Dr. Reeves was in her 60s, with kind eyes and a direct manner. After introductions, she asked us to explain why we'd come. Derek and I looked at each other, neither wanting to start. Finally, I launched into the story. The mutual suspicions, the private investigators, the absurd discovery. Dr. Reeves listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. That's one of the saddest stories I've heard in a long time. Not funny, not absurd, sad. The fact that you both immediately assumed infidelity tells me something important, she continued. It tells me you've both been expecting this marriage to fail. You've been waiting for the other shoe to drop. You've been living in anticipation of betrayal rather than in a state of trust and partnership. Derek shifted uncomfortably. I didn't think of it that way. What would you say you've been thinking for the past few years? Derek was quiet, considering. I guess I've been thinking we're comfortable, that we have a good life, good jobs, nice house, no major problems. I thought that was enough. Was it enough? Dr. Reeves asked gently. No, Derek admitted. I've been lonely. Even living with someone, I've been lonely. I felt tears starting, because I knew exactly what he meant. I'd been lonely too. We'd been two lonely people sharing a house, going through the motions of a marriage without the actual connection that makes marriage meaningful. When did you stop talking to each other? Really talking about things that matter? Derek and I looked at each other. Neither of us could pinpoint an exact moment. It had been gradual. Conversations had become shorter, more surface level. We'd talk about logistics and schedules, but not feelings or dreams or fears. We'd stopped asking each other the deep questions, stopped being curious about each other's inner lives. I don't remember the last time we had a conversation that wasn't about practical things. What we needed from the grocery store, who was picking up dry cleaning, when bills were due. We've been roommates managing a household, not partners building a life. And neither of you addressed this? Dr. Reeves asked. Neither of you said, something's wrong, we need to reconnect. I didn't know how. It felt like we were too far gone. Like if I brought it up, it would just confirm that we'd failed somehow. So instead, you both pretended everything was fine until the pretending became unsustainable, and you both started looking for external explanations for your unhappiness. An affair would explain why you felt disconnected. An affair would mean the problem was infidelity, not something deeper and harder to fix. She was right. It had been easier to imagine Derek was cheating than to confront the reality that our marriage had slowly died from neglect. Affairs are dramatic, clear-cut. They have villains and victims. There's something you can point to and say, this is the problem. What we actually had was much more complicated. Two people who'd grown apart. Two people who'd stopped trying. Two people who'd stayed together because leaving seemed harder than staying, even though staying meant being lonely and disconnected. Over the next several sessions, we unpacked years of small moments that had accumulated into this crisis. Times when one of us had tried to connect and the other had been distracted or dismissive. Dates that became obligations rather than joy. Intimacy that had become infrequent and mechanical. Dreams we'd stopped sharing because we'd stopped believing the other person cared. In one session, Dr. Reeves had us watch the surveillance footage from the private investigators. It was Marcus's idea originally. He'd thought it might be helpful in therapy, seeing ourselves from an outside perspective. He'd compiled clips from both investigations into a single video. Watching it was surreal and painful. There was Derek, walking to his car, glancing around nervously before pulling out his phone. On the phone for the entire drive, smiling and animated in a way I hadn't seen him be at home in years. Was he talking to the wedding planner, to his best friend about the surprise, to someone who still excited him because they weren't me? There was me sitting in my car in a parking lot, on my phone, laughing at something, looking more relaxed and happy than I'd looked at home in months. Who had I been texting? The venue coordinator? Derek's sister who was helping with the party? Someone who didn't know me well enough yet to bore me. The footage showed us both lying. Derek coming home and telling me he had been at the gym when the footage showed he had actually been at a jewelry store, probably picking out rings for the wedding renewal. Me telling Derek I was meeting a friend for coffee when I had actually been meeting with a caterer. Small lies, justified in our minds because they were in service of surprises, but lies nonetheless. And watching ourselves lie so easily, so naturally, made us both realize how much lying had become part of our daily routine. We lied to each other all the time, I said during that session, still watching the screen. Not just about surprises, about everything. About how we're feeling, about whether we're happy, about what we want. Why do you lie? Dr. Reeves asked. Because the truth feels dangerous. The truth is, I'm not sure I want this anymore. I'm not sure I even know who she is anymore, or if she knows who I am. And saying that out loud means confronting that maybe this marriage was a mistake, or became a mistake somewhere along the way. Hearing Derek say that hurt, but it wasn't a surprise, because I'd been thinking the same things. I love the idea of you, Derek, the person I married, the life we were supposed to build together, but I don't know if I love the reality anymore. We're not those people. We haven't been for years, and I've been too afraid to admit it.
Dr. Reeves asked us to talk about who we actually were now versus who we'd been 10 years ago when we got married. The differences were stark. 10 years ago, Derek had been passionate about his work in software development, excited about creating things, full of ideas and energy. Now, he was burned out, going through the motions at a job he'd stopped caring about years ago, but stayed with because it paid well and was stable. 10 years ago, I'd been working in marketing, but dreaming of starting my own design business. I'd been creative and ambitious. Now I was still at the same marketing firm, having given up on my dreams gradually without even noticing when they'd disappeared. 10 years ago, we'd hiked on weekends, traveled when we could, tried new restaurants, went to concerts. We'd been adventurous and spontaneous. Now we spent most evenings on the couch, watching television we weren't really interested in, eating takeout we didn't particularly enjoy, passing time until we could go to sleep. We'd both changed, and not for the better. We'd become smaller, more boring versions of ourselves, and we'd enabled that in each other. We'd become comfortable in our mutual stagnation. What would you want your life to look like if you could design it from scratch? Dr. Reeves asked me during our 5th session. Derek wasn't there for this one. She wanted to talk to us individually. I thought about it for a long time. I'd want to travel more. I'd want to take risks on my career instead of playing it safe. I'd want to feel passionate about something again. I'd want to be with someone who challenges me and excites me, not someone who just exists beside me. And does Derek challenge and excite you? No, not anymore. Maybe not ever, really. I think we fell in love with potential versions of each other and then never became those people. Do you want to save this marriage? The question I'd been avoiding. Did I want to save it? Could it even be saved? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me feels like I should want to. We've invested 10 years, we have a house together, a whole shared life. Starting over seems terrifying and exhausting. But another part of me feels like staying is just giving up, accepting that this is as good as it gets. And I don't want this to be as good as it gets. When Derek had his individual session, Dr. Reeves later told me he'd expressed similar thoughts. He didn't know if he wanted to save the marriage either. He was scared of starting over, but also scared of staying stuck in a life that felt like it was slowly suffocating him. Our joint sessions after that shifted focus. Instead of trying to fix the marriage, we started talking about whether the marriage should be fixed, whether we'd be better off as friends, as ex-spouses, as separate people building separate lives. Not all divorces are failures, Dr. Reeves called us. Sometimes they're recognition that you've grown into different people who want different things. Sometimes the healthiest choice is to acknowledge that and move forward separately rather than forcing something that doesn't work anymore. We decided to try a trial separation. Derek moved into our guest room first, then, after a few awkward weeks, moved into a furnished apartment across town. The physical separation helped clarify things. I missed having someone in the house, but I didn't particularly miss Derek. The things I missed were generic companionship, not specific to him. Derek later told me he felt the same way. He missed having a partner in theory, but not me specifically. He missed the idea of marriage more than the reality of ours. During the separation, something interesting happened. We both started becoming versions of ourselves we'd lost. I signed up for a design course I'd been putting off for years, started working on a portfolio for the business I'd abandoned dreaming about. Derek started rock climbing again, something he loved in college but had given up. He seemed lighter, more energized when I saw him to discuss practical matters about the house. We went to dinner once during the separation, 8 weeks in, to talk about next steps. It was the easiest conversation we'd had in years. Without the weight of trying to maintain a failing marriage, we could actually talk to each other. We laughed about the private investigator fiasco, though the laughter had a bitter edge to it. We spent all that money to confirm we weren't cheating, Derek said. But in a way, we were both cheating. We were cheating ourselves out of being honest, cheating each other out of real partnership. The surveillance footage was damning, I agreed, just not in the way we expected. It showed two people going through the motions of a life they'd stopped wanting. Do you think we ever really wanted it, or did we just want the idea of it? The stability, the normalcy, checking boxes on the life script we thought we were supposed to follow. I didn't have an answer. Maybe we'd loved each other once, really loved each other, or maybe we just loved the story we were telling ourselves about who we were together. I think we should get divorced, I said, not angrily or sadly, just matter-of-factly. I think we've known for a while that this wasn't working. The investigators were just our weird way of forcing a crisis that would make us confront it. Derek nodded slowly. I think you're right. I think staying together at this point is just inertia and fear, but not love. Not really. We can do this amicably, I said. Split things fairly, stay friends if we want, or at least stay civil. This doesn't have to be ugly. No, Derek agreed. It doesn't. We filed for divorce 3 months after the private investigator revelation. It was uncontested, straightforward. We divided our assets fairly without fighting. I kept the house because I could afford it and he didn't want it. He took more of the retirement accounts to balance that out. We split our savings. We divided our belongings without drama, mostly because neither of us was particularly attached to the life we'd built together.
The divorce was finalized 6 weeks ago. 10 years of marriage ended with signatures and paperwork and a strange sense of relief. Our friends were shocked. To the outside world, we'd seemed fine. No dramatic fights, no obvious problems. The few people we told about the private investigator situation thought it was hilarious, a crazy mix-up that we'd surely laugh about in years to come. They didn't understand that it wasn't the punchline to a funny story. It was the symptom of a deeply dysfunctional relationship. Some people asked if we'd tried hard enough to save it, if we'd given counseling a real chance. The answer was yes, we had. But counseling had helped us realize that some marriages aren't worth saving,
that sometimes the healthiest thing is to acknowledge you've grown into incompatible people and move forward separately. My parents were disappointed. They'd liked Derek, liked the stability our marriage represented. They didn't understand why we couldn't just work through whatever phase this is. They thought we were giving up too easily. But it wasn't easy. Leaving a 10-year marriage, even one that wasn't working, is one of the hardest things I've ever done. It meant admitting failure. It meant starting over at 36. It meant being alone in a way I hadn't been since my 20s. But it also meant being honest. It meant not waking up every day in a relationship held together by avoidance and inertia. It meant having the space to figure out who I actually was and what I actually wanted, separate from the identity I'd built around being Derek's wife. I'm still figuring that out. I'm still in the design course, still building a portfolio. I've started going to networking events, making new connections. I've been on a few dates, nothing serious yet, but at least I'm open to possibility. At least I'm not stuck in a marriage with someone I'd stopped really seeing years ago. Derek is rock climbing regularly, apparently. I saw on social media that he'd joined a climbing group, gone on a weekend trip to some outdoor climbing spot. He looked happy in the photos. Genuinely happy in a way I hadn't seen him in years. We text occasionally about practical things. We're not close, but we're not enemies. We're just two people who were married once and aren't anymore. Two people who had to hire private investigators to spy on each other before we could finally be honest about how broken we were. I think about those surveillance videos sometimes. Two people going through the motions. Two people lying to each other constantly about small things and big things. Two people who'd stopped really being present in their own lives, let alone in their marriage. That footage was more revealing than anything we could have discovered about affairs or betrayals. It showed us the truth we'd been avoiding. We'd stopped being partners years ago. We'd just been too afraid or too comfortable to acknowledge it. The $10,000 we spent on private investigators was, in a strange way, the best investment we made in our marriage. Not because it saved the marriage, but because it ended it. Because it forced us to see what we'd been avoiding. Because it gave us permission to stop pretending. I ran into Marcus, my private investigator, a few weeks ago at a coffee shop. He recognized me and came over to say hello. Asked how things turned out. We got divorced, I told him. He nodded, like this didn't surprise him. I'm sorry it didn't work out. I'm not, I said, surprising myself with the honesty. The marriage was over long before I hired you. You just helped us see it. Most of my cases end one of two ways. Either I find evidence of infidelity, and the marriage ends, or I find nothing, and the couple realizes the problem wasn't cheating, it was that they'd stopped being a couple in any real sense. Sounds like you fell into the second category. Do those couples usually stay together? Sometimes, if they're willing to do the hard work of rebuilding trust and connection, but a lot of times no. A lot of times the act of hiring an investigator is the beginning of the end. Once you've reached that point of suspicion and surveillance, it's hard to come back from. He was right. We hadn't come back from it. We'd gone forward through it and come out the other side as two separate people instead of a married couple. I'm 36 years old and divorced. It's not where I thought I'd be at this age. But it's honest, at least. It's real. It's not a performance for an audience I'd stopped caring about. I think Derek and I both spent years performing our marriage, playing roles we thought we were supposed to play, checking boxes we thought we were supposed to check. And somewhere in all that performing, we forgot to actually be present. We forgot to actually connect. We forgot to actually love each other in a real, active, intentional way. The private investigator story is absurd. Two people hiring investigators to follow each other while planning surprise celebrations. It's the kind of thing that should be a funny anecdote, a crazy mix-up that got sorted out.
But it's not funny. It's sad. It's the story of a marriage that had been dead for years, but nobody wanted to pronounce it. It's the story of two people who chose surveillance over communication, who chose suspicion over trust, who chose to assume the worst of each other because that was easier than confronting the mundane reality of having grown apart. I don't regret the divorce. I don't regret the $10,000 or the embarrassment or the pain of ending a 10-year relationship, because staying would have been worse. Staying would have meant more years of going through the motions, more years of being lonely in a marriage, more years of being someone I wasn't with someone who wasn't being himself either. Sometimes the trash takes itself out, as the saying goes, and sometimes you have to hire two private investigators to follow each other before you can admit the relationship is garbage. That's my story. The time I hired someone to follow my husband, discovered he'd hired someone to follow me, and we both realized, through the absurdity of it all, that our marriage had been over for years. We'd just been too scared to admit it until we couldn't avoid it anymore. The surveillance footage from that investigation sits on a flash drive in my desk drawer. I've watched it a few times trying to understand how we got to that point. How two people who once loved each other enough to get married ended up spying on each other instead of talking to each other. I don't have good answers. Relationships are complicated. People change. Sometimes you grow together, and sometimes you grow apart. Derek and I grew apart, slowly and quietly, until we were strangers living in the same house. The private investigators just helped us see what we'd been refusing to look at. And for that, I suppose I'm grateful, even if it cost $10,000 and the end of my marriage. At least now I'm not lying. Not to Derek, not to myself. At least now I'm building a life based on what I actually want, not what I think I'm supposed to want. That's worth something. Maybe more worth the marriage we were trying so hard to preserve.